All right, we're about to do something pretty cool. We're going to shrink ourselves down to the microscopic level for a tour of the most fundamental unit of life, the incredibly complex, bustling world inside a single cell.
So let me ask you something. Think about the biggest whale in the ocean, or the tiniest little bacterium you can imagine. What do they all have in common? If you peel back all the layers, past the skin, the organs, the tissues, what's the one thing that's left? Yep, you guessed it, the cell. Okay, so let's dive right in at the beginning. How did we even figure this stuff out? Our story starts with the moment someone first laid eyes on these tiny little rooms of life.
Right, so this wasn't some eureka moment that happened all at once. Nope, it was more like a slow burn discovery, built piece by piece over centuries. It all kicks off way back in 1665. You've got Robert Hooke looking at a piece of cork under a microscope, and he sees these little empty boxes. He calls them cells because they look like the rooms monks lived in. Then, just a few years later, this guy Anthony van Leeuwenhoek comes along with a way better microscope, and he realizes, whoa, these things are alive. He's seeing bacteria and blood cells swimming around. Fast forward over 100 years, and Robert Brown pinpoints that little dot in the middle of a cell, the nucleus. See how it's all connecting? Each person is adding a new piece to the puzzle. And then, finally, in 1838, two scientists, Schleiden and Schwann, they take all these pieces and put them together to create something absolutely revolutionary.
And what they came up with is what we now call the cell theory. It's basically the 3 golden rules of all life. Rule number 1, if it's alive, it's made of cells. Simple. Rule 2, the cell is the smallest possible thing that can be considered alive. It's the basic unit. And rule number 3, and this is a big one, cells don't just pop out of nowhere. Every single cell comes from another cell that already existed. I know, they sound kind of straightforward now, but back then, this was mind-blowing stuff. These 3 ideas are literally the foundation of all modern biology. Okay, so we know what a cell is, but it turns out they're not all the same. There are really 2 major designs, 2 different blueprints for how life gets built.
So, on one side, you've got the prokaryote. The best way to picture this is like a small, one-room workshop. It's super simple, super efficient. All the tools and materials are just kind of floating around in one open space. But then, you've got the eukaryote. And this isn't a workshop. It's a massive, bustling metropolis. It's got different districts, specialized factories, a power grid, and it's all managed from a central city hall.
So let's break down the key differences between these 2 blueprints. The big one is organization. Eukaryotic cells, that's us, plants, fungi, they're all about compartments. They have a true nucleus, that secure city hall we talked about, with a membrane protecting the precious DNA inside. Prokaryotes, like bacteria, they're way more minimalist. Their DNA just hangs out in a general area called the nucleoid. And it's not just the nucleus. Eukaryotes are packed with all these little membrane-bound structures called organelles, each with its own job. Prokaryotes? Nope, none of that. Even their little protein-making machines, the ribosomes, are a different size. It's really 2 fundamentally different strategies for how to be alive. All right, for the rest of this journey, we're going to focus on that complex eukaryotic city cell. And, you know, any good city tour has to start at the city limits, right? So, let's head to the border. Okay, so every cell has a plasma membrane, but I want you to erase the image of a solid brick wall from your mind. That's not what this is. This is more like a sophisticated, intelligent border control. The model we use to describe it is called the fluid mosaic model, which sounds fancy, but it's a great description. Imagine a double layer of oily molecules, lipids, with all these different proteins floating around in it, kind of like boats on a lake. It's constantly moving, it's fluid, and its most critical job is to be selectively permeable. In other words, it's the ultimate bouncer at a club, deciding exactly what gets in and what gets kicked out. So, how does this bouncer manage all the traffic? Well, some stuff gets a free pass. That's what we call passive transport. There's diffusion, where molecules just naturally move from a really crowded place to a less crowded one. Think of how a smell spreads out in a room. Osmosis is just the special name for when water does that. These things are downhill. They take 0 energy from the cell. But what if the cell needs to bring something in from a place where there isn't much of it, or kick something out into a place that's already crowded? That's like trying to push your way into an already packed train. It's going uphill, against the natural flow. That's active transport, and it costs energy. The cell has to spend its power source, this molecule called ATP, to make it happen.
Now, some cells have an extra layer of armor. We're talking plants and bacteria here. Outside their plasma membrane, they have a cell wall. This thing is rigid, it's tough, and it's not even alive. It's like a structural exoskeleton, giving the cell shape and protection. So if the plasma membrane is the border patrol, this is the massive, fortified stone wall around the entire city.
Okay, we've cleared security at the border. Now let's head inside the city walls and check out the different neighborhoods. We're going on a tour of the organelles. These are all the specialized buildings and factories inside the cell, and each one has a very specific job that keeps this whole metropolis running.
First stop, the power grid. You've probably heard this one before, the mitochondria. They're famously called the powerhouse of the cell, and for good reason. These little guys are responsible for taking fuel, like the glucose from your food, and converting it into usable energy. Through a process called cellular respiration, they generate ATP, which is the energy currency that powers literally everything else the cell needs to do.
And if you look at their structure, they are just perfectly designed for this job. They have a double membrane, and that inner membrane is folded up like crazy into these projections called cristae. Why? To create a massive surface area. It's like taking a huge factory floor and folding it up to fit in a tiny building, allowing for tons of energy-producing reactions to happen all at once. But here's where things get really weird. Mitochondria have their own DNA. And their own ribosomes. It's totally separate from the main genetic blueprint in the cell's nucleus. It's wild to think about. It's almost like they are ancient bacteria that set up shop inside our cells billions of years ago and just never left.
Now, if we were touring a plant cell, we'd find a different kind of power station. We'd find chloroplasts. Think of these as the city's solar farms. They're what make plants green, and they perform this absolutely magical process called photosynthesis. They capture the energy from sunlight and turn it into chemical fuel.
And this brings up this really cool, beautiful symmetry in nature. Chloroplasts and mitochondria are like two sides of the same coin. The chloroplasts use sunlight to make the fuel. The mitochondria then burn that fuel to release the energy. It's a perfect cycle. And you know what else? They share that same bizarre feature. Just like mitochondria, chloroplasts have their own DNA and can copy themselves. That's why they're called semi-autonomous. They're kind of their own thing, living inside the larger cell.
Okay, moving on from the power plants, let's head over to the city's industrial park and shipping department. The whole operation starts with the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short. It's this huge, sprawling network of folded membranes. You've got the rough ER, which is rough because it's covered in little dots called ribosomes, and those are the actual factories that build proteins. Then you have the smooth ER, which makes other stuff like fats and steroids. So once all these products are manufactured, where do they go? They get sent to the Golgi body. The Golgi is basically the city's FedEx or Amazon fulfillment center. It receives the products, modifies them, packages them up, and ships them out to wherever they need to go. Of course, any bustling city produces trash, right? So you need a sanitation department. And in the cell, that's the job of the lysosomes. These are little sacs filled with super powerful digestive enzymes. They're like the recycling crew, breaking down old, worn-out cell parts or gobbling up invading bacteria. But they also have a much more dramatic function. If a cell gets too old or is damaged beyond repair, the lysosomes can actually burst open on purpose. They release all those enzymes and digest the entire cell from the inside out. It's a self-destruct mechanism, which is why they have the grim nickname suicidal bags. All right, we've seen the factories, the power plants, the shipping centers, but we've saved the most important building for last. We are now heading to the very heart of the city, to Command Central. Let's go inside the nucleus.
So the nucleus is basically Fort Knox. It's a secure command center surrounded by a double membrane with guarded gateways or pores to control who comes and goes. And what's it protecting? The master blueprint for the entire organism, the DNA. Most of the time, the DNA is just a tangled, stringy mess called chromatin. It's only when the cell is about to divide that it coils up super tightly into those classic X-shaped chromosomes you see in textbooks. And from this secure vault, the nucleus sends out all the orders. It uses the DNA blueprint to direct every single thing that happens in the cell, from day-to-day operations to the massive undertaking of making a new cell.
Okay, so that's the grand tour of the organelles. Now that we've seen all the individual parts, let's zoom out a bit and compare the two main types of these eukaryotic cities, the plant cell versus the animal cell. When you look at the differences, it all comes down to their different lifestyles. It's a perfect example of form follows function. Plants can't move, right? So they need structure and rigidity. That's why they have that strong cell wall. They have to make their own food from sunlight, so of course they have chloroplasts. And they have that one massive central vacuole, which is mainly for storing water and maintaining pressure. Animal cells, on the other hand, we move around and we eat food, so we don't have a cell wall or chloroplasts. But we do have things like centrioles, which play a key role when our cells need to divide.
And that pretty much wraps up our tour. We've seen how a single tiny cell operates just like a vast, complex, perfectly coordinated city. So let me leave you with this one last thought to chew on. You are made of trillions, not millions, not billions, but trillions of these living cities, and they're all working together right now without you even thinking about it. So it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? With all of that incredible autonomous activity going on inside you, who's really in charge?